Marshall Sprague seems to have been chosen by fate and well prepared by education and experience for his role as the premier historian of the Pikes Peak region. Born in Newark, Ohio in 1909, he attended the Lawrenceville School where he wrote for the student paper, and later Princeton University, where he majored in English with an unofficial minor in jazz. It was both his love of music and his love of writing that has propelled Marshall through his remarkable career. Please join Ree Mobley, the head of the local history department of the Pikes Peak Library District, as she takes you back in time through the life and good times of Marshall Sprague. In this quiet home on Wood Avenue, Marshall Sprague has chronicled the history of the Pikes Peak region for almost 50 years and has seen many changes in Colorado Springs. But Marshall's career as a writer actually began half a world away.
My sister, who was stationed in Tientsin, China, which is the second largest town in China, said, I was out of a job during the Depression. You come to Tientsin, and so I went there and I immediately got a job on the North China Star.
After a year, he moved on to Paris, where he worked for the Paris edition of the New York Herald Tribune. It was in Paris that he mastered the art of feature writing.
And then I went up to Paris and asked for a job. And by golly, I got one.
On the Herald?
On the Paris Herald, which was a little, it had been old since ever. The Paris Herald had been founded in the 80s, I guess, in Paris, owned by the Paris Herald in New York, of course. Well, anyway, I got a job right away because the tourist business was so bad because Hitler was getting so threatening. People were afraid to go to Europe in 1934, which was the year I hit there.
In 1938, Marshall returned to the United States to work on the New York Times and to marry Edna Jane Ailes, or as everyone calls her, EJ. The couple had met years earlier when they were students at Princeton and Vassar. Marshall's fame as a camp counselor at EJ's brother's Maine summer camp had attracted her notice.
Let me add something, will you?
Yes,
I just want to say that Marshall Sprague was the most inept counselor of any camp. He distinguished himself by going, when they first got there, there was a forest fire, and the whole camp went out. Marshall, I'm told, went out in white linen knickers and white buck shoes, which is what people wore at Princeton in those days, and helped put out the fire.
An early happy memory of their friendship was christening Calliope, Marsh's Model A Ford.
So that was the
You and I christened Calliope on the Storm King Highway.
Oh, on the Storm King Highway overlooking the Hudson.
I was at Vassar and he was at Princeton. And he came up to show me the car and we christened it.
The couple spent the spring of 1939 on a European honeymoon, where they saw the ominous buildup of fascist military power.
Well, we were in Vienna, and after Hitler had taken over Austria, and it was just so spooky. I couldn't stand it. Everybody, all the people were just.
Egypt couldn't stand it.
And I said, we were going to go on over to Budapest and Bucharest, and I said, let's get out of here, and we did.
Diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1940, Marshall Sprague came to Colorado Springs in 1941 to follow the rest cure. The cure was slow, and it was a difficult time for the Sprague family.
Nobody in New York paid much attention to tuberculosis in 1930, and it took a long time for them to find that I had it.
1940.
But it took them, gosh, it took almost a year of x-rays and one thing and another to find a doctor who said, "You've got TB," and sent me to Dr. Webb in Colorado Springs. And I talked to E.J., "How'd you like to go to Colorado Springs?" "Where is that?" She said, "Is that near Omaha?"
I didn't. I had been to Colorado Springs. Yeah, I'd been to Colorado Springs. I don't think Marsh had.
She still thinks Omaha is a state.
Oh, well, that's true. I think it ought to be with a name like that.
Well, lo and behold, we came to Colorado Springs and to Dr. Webb. And my love affair with Colorado Springs began.
An outcast in New York, Marshall found the community of Colorado Springs embraced him in spite of his illness.
People in New York, when you, if they thought you had TB, they ran out of the room. And when you came to Colorado Springs, half the families
They all came to call on you.
had all come with their children or somebody in the family for TB, so they thought nothing of it. They didn't run out of the room. And everybody in the East just thought of it as a terrible disgrace. And of course here, since everybody had it, why, if you didn't have TB like Chase Stone, and you thought you didn't amount to much.
It's ironic that Marshall's illness actually helped him become a better writer. It was during his time in bed that he wrote his first book, The Business of Getting Well.
The Business of Getting Well. It was just a sort of a lightly written book about how to live in bed. In the middle of my curing days, I wrote it in bed in Glockner Hospital, which is what Penrose is now. It was Glockner then. And by God, it was just a short book of 30,000, 40,000 words. And by God, they bought it. They sold it. I had already run in good housekeeping.
Through all these hardships, the Sprague family became closer, and Marshall credits his wife E.J. for his recovery from a very serious illness.
Well, the desire to live was because of age, entirely.
Okay. Tell us about
The whole thing was wrapped around when I got sick, and that dear child immediately, even though we'd just been married and had a little one-year-old child, the philosophy of life was all tremendously strengthened by your using it to cope with the boredom of recovery and the patience that you had and the faith you had to have that you were going to get well, even though it was taking forever. It takes forever for these darn cavities to heal.
As he recovered and learned more about Colorado, Marshall and E.J. decided to make Colorado Springs their home. They purchased the house they were renting on Wood Avenue and began to raise their two sons, Joseph and Stephen, and their daughter Sharon. As he established himself in Colorado Springs, Marshall discovered the people and events that would demand his talents as writer and historian for the next 50 years. Virginia City had Mark Twain. Roaring Forks had Bret Hart. But Cripple Creek, the world's richest gold camp, had no chronicler until Marshall Sprague told the story of Boom and Money Mountain and the king of Cripple Creek. Marshall wrote about the old volcanic crater, harboring treasure that defied the imagination of all but a few men. He benefited from the first-hand accounts of the people who had actually lived during that time, and from the knowledge and friendship of noted Colorado author Frank Waters.
Oh, I want to be sure that I got all the feeling about, a lot of feeling about Cripple Creek too, by reading the books of a wonderful writer, Colorado Springs, who is Frank Waters, who grew up here and he spent a whole summer in the Rockies because he was the only one that had interviewed all of the servants that Stratton had in their house down where the Daniels garage is now. But I had the original people that had seen it from the beginning to tell me how it was. Oh, I've got 4 or 5 of them that could tell me exactly what they had seen happen the minute the sudden discovery of gold by Bob Womack became known. And it soon became proved that it was a real gold mine, the richest gold mine in 1900, the richest gold camp in the world. But a tremendous thing for Colorado Springs was the money that came out of Cripple Creek and poured into Colorado Springs through some of the citizens that had invested in it.
Some of the Colorado Springs residents who benefited from Cripple Creek gold were Winfield Scott Stratton, who had been a $5 a day carpenter in Colorado Springs. Since 1873, he prospected every summer for 17 years before finally striking it rich with the Independence Mine. Soon after, he became the district's first millionaire and one of the region's greatest benefactors. And the real estate and mining partners, Charles Tutt and Spencer Penrose, whose careers had only just begun at Cripple Creek. Spencer Penrose went on to build the Broadmoor Hotel and established with his wife Julie the El Pomar Foundation. Although E.J. and Marshall arrived in Colorado Springs shortly after Spencer Penrose's death, they developed a close friendship with his widow, Julie Villiers McMillan Penrose, the grande dame of the region for 6 decades.
Well, she was the most vivacious, warm, interested in you, and a lot of people. She also had a temper about some. She was an American firster, so of course a violent Republican.
Conservative.
As was Penrose, ultra-conservative.
When she first met Marsh, we were at a dinner party, and she said to him, "And whom did you vote for in the last election?" And Marshall said, "I voted for Penrose." And she slapped him at the table. It was an international incident. And the next day she called up and she said, "Oh, Mr. Sprague, that was so foolish of me. Will you please tonight?" Because she liked him, in spite of the fact that he voted for Roosevelt. But she was really amusing.
She was so amusing.
And very generous. She operated on intuition. She really understood many things, but she wasn't cerebral about them. She just felt them. And she operated on her feelings, and she never let her feelings was Boardman Robinson, and he was practically a communist.
Boardman Robinson, who was the leading communist in New York.
And she adored him.
But she adored him, and she adored his time here to be the art director of Fountain Valley School.
And then the Art Center.
To run the Colorado Springs Art School and the Fine Arts Center. And Speck used to talk endlessly at dinner in El Pomar, in their fancy place in El Pomar, and Speck would listen respectively while Boardman went on explaining all the virtues of communism. And finally Speck would stand up, "Oh, nuts, I'm going to bed." And Julie used to tell me about that story.
Marshall Sprague researched and wrote 8 books, numerous articles, scores of cordial introductions, and a dozen short histories, including a short celebratory history of the community's literary landmark, the Chinook Bookstore. His latest book, The King of Cripple Creek, is currently being published and distributed by the Library District. Intelligence, style, urbanity, congeniality mark the work of Marshall Sprague and have defined his histories of the Pikes Peak region.
Well, as we were chatting about, he was a journalist, and he wrote, he never became unnecessarily flowery. His text was to the point and very fast-moving, and therefore immensely readable, just like Time magazine is very readable. Marsh was an immensely competent historian. He researched his facts totally, and he was never quick or fast like that. But again, he had this journalistic style that made him very easy and quick and pleasant to read.
I mean, I have a positive plan for every word I write, just some habit, and it's the feature idea. And I look through my book and I look at it and I say, now, is that true? Do you try to make the book readable? So I look through a book and I look, here's a paragraph, and I read the first sentence. Is that got to come on of some sort? Does it have something in it that makes the reader, even in the tiniest way, want to see the next page?
Marshall Sprague died on September 9th, 1994. He viewed change in the community he loved and knew so well with optimism.
Everybody loved this guy. He was an immensely decent human being, which I don't say about casually. One of the half-dozen more decent people I've ever known, I think.
Well, I just have always felt so lucky because I always wanted to be a writer. I never wanted to be anything else. And I never believed I would be. And then all of a sudden, there I was. But the main thing was much more important than that was my wife. And she was fun. She understood about writing.
One little quick story that I said to him a few years after Newport came on. I said, Marsh, you were here during this very interesting period of time, you know, and surely you must know all the hanky-panky that went on here, too, during that time. You know, you really ought to write it down and have it. I was joking. You know, I didn't really mean it, but he said, well, you know, this town has been awfully good to me. I could never do anything to hurt it. He is our historian laureate of this period of time. There's no question about it. There have, been Harvey Carter, and there have been a number of other immensely competent historians who lived here for a while or for a long time and were highly respected, but none like Marsh. He was ours, and so we've lost something.
That's too high.